Hello, testing. I'm going to try to record a bit more quietly today because my parents are sleeping in the room across from me in the hallway, and I think they can hear me because they left their door open for some reason. But anyways, hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Someone Says. You already know why we're here. I've got 16 books to talk about, so let's dive right in. Unfortunately, the first book that I finished this year was a bit of a dud for me. This was The Door on the Sea by Caskey Russell, and this is a fantasy book following a quest where the main character has to lead a crew on a mission to recover a powerful weapon that can help save his people. And I gave this book 3 stars. The reason why I didn't really like this book is because one of the characters was way too annoying. I know he's supposed to be a very easy to hate character, but he was just so obnoxious and irritating. Like, I felt like he got way too much quote-unquote screen time in the book, that he was honestly being so obnoxious and irritating that it was actively taking away from my enjoyment of the book and sort of overshadowed all else. I felt like we didn't really get that much. I feel like we did, but the annoying characters' annoyances really overshadowed the other relationship building moments that we had between the main character and the other members of the crew, which kind of sucks. The next book that I read is actually a nonfiction book called The Manager's Path by Camille Fournier. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. And as the subtitle on the cover of this book says, this book is a guide for tech leaders navigating growth and change. I gave this book 5 stars. I really liked it because it was organized really well and the concepts were explained in a manner that felt accessible, even to someone who's just starting out in their career like myself. I felt like it helped give me a sort of roadmap for what my career pathway options could look like if I go down the manager route, and it also helped to alleviate some of my just general fear and imposter syndrome as well. And I think this is definitely a book that I will have to come back to along different points in my career, whether it be in a year or maybe in a few years when I make my next career move. All right, the third book that I read is called The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar. This is a short story set in a world where magic comes from the power of conjugations and syntax, and we follow 2 sisters who weave magic using their singing. I gave this book 5 stars as well, and first off, I highly recommend listening to this book as an audiobook. A huge part of this book's magic system relates to song and melody, and in the audiobook rendition there are sound effects, singing, and instrumentals as well. This book was actually really short. Only 2/3 of the audiobook program was for the story, and then the rest was a preview for the short story collection that this author is releasing. That said, it felt like this book was the perfect length. The story had a very folktale feel to it, and it was written beautifully. I wish I was able to describe it better, but the story was crackling with mysterious magic. The author did a wonderful job of building atmosphere, and I also appreciated how beautiful the character relationships were. I was particularly drawn to the theme of sisterhood and was very moved at how much Esther and Isabel cared for each other. The next book is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the second book in the Poppy War trilogy. I don't think this is much of a spoiler, but in the first book of the series, which is also called The Poppy War, the main character, Rin, her hometown ends up going to war against a neighboring kingdom. And following the end of the first book, we find ourselves now having to deal with the aftermath of that war, if it's even over, we don't know, and deal with a civil war that's brewing under the surface. I gave this book 4 stars. This was a solid continuation of the first book. And with the first book and also the second book, I feel like pacing was probably the biggest issue for me. It's just something that I'm not entirely used to since I don't read a lot of epic fantasy stories, and these books are very thick. I especially had a tough time in the beginning because I'm not good at reading from the perspective of characters that I don't respect. And unfortunately, Rin, our main character, is an example of such a character because we just have very different personalities and outlooks in life. But looking beyond my own personal dislike of Rin, the rest of the story made up for it because I was very interested in learning more about the politics and world building. Honestly, this book gets depressing to read at times, especially because of the strong parallels to actual historical events with the Opium War and Western spheres of influence / imperialism. But I think it's really important to read stories like this so that we can be more educated and prevent future instances of this from occurring again. Next, we have Persuasion by Jane Austen. For lack of a better phrasing, this is a second chance romance. Before the events in this book, our two love interests, Anne Elliot and Frederick Wentworth, were actually previously engaged and very much in love. However, Anne's family convinced her to break off the engagement because they felt that Frederick was too poor and low class. From there, Frederick ends up going into the military, and then we pick up years later when he returns with a better social standing and money to back up his name. But the only issue is that he seems to be into one or both of Anne's friends now. And I gave this book 4 stars. Even though this book was a reread for me, I felt like this time around counts as the first time of me actually reading it, because I was actually really distracted the first time I read or actually listened to this book, and I missed a lot of the plot. This time around, however, I found that I really enjoyed this book. Shocking how much a difference paying attention makes. I found that I like this book better than Pride and Prejudice, actually, which I feel like is Jane Austen's most famous work. I think it's because the relationship between the two main characters in Persuasion felt less rushed compared to Pride and Prejudice, since Anne and Frederick's relationship their relationship history has already been established, and now it's just we're seeing if we can get that fired back up. What really got me was the yearning and tension between Anne and Captain Wentworth as we see if their previous history can be overcome and forgotten, and whether it's going to be a case of them having to move on or reconnect once again. I also found Anne's character to be more fleshed out compared to Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. For me, this book was very reminiscent of a shoujo romance manga, which is a genre that I'm becoming more fond of these days. The next book I have is another 5-star read. It's called Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. This is one of my favorite books that I have read this year, so I'm going to try not to give too much away. But in essence, this book is a beautifully written love story between a goddess and a mortal man. In this world, the power of gods is tied to the constellations, and gods can gain more power by killing another god and stealing their stars. As a result, our goddess was raised from a young age to be wary of emotional attachments because it's too easy to end up with a knife in your back. And that's all I really want to share, because part of the reason why I love this book is the discovery of learning more about the world and its characters. On top of that, the author did an amazing job of telling this story like an old myth or folktale. She was able to convey this sense of magic brimming under the surface of everything around us. There were moments where I was genuinely in awe or even felt a little reverent towards some of the divines, and I'm not a religious person at all. I also noticed that the immortals in this book reminded me a lot of the Greek pantheon, and that the gods are weird and fickle beings. They can be cruel and careless, but some of them are also gentle and kind. I especially liked following the different character relationships, in particular those involving Bade, Adria, Vincent, Nathaniel, and Matilda. They were full of such warmth, and it was so nice to see these relationships blossom and flourish. In addition, I found that the magic system that the Pantheon is based on to be very interesting and up my alley. I love anything celestial, especially stars, so having the divine's powers be tied to constellations and stars instantly grabbed my attention. Overall, this book was very beautifully written, and in case you're curious, you do not have to be familiar with Divine Rivals at all to read this book, even though it does take place in the same universe. Moving on, we have The Ornithologist Field Guide to Love by India Holton. And while I was writing my notes for this, I was going to say that this book reminded me a lot of The Wisteria Society of Scoundrels, but it turns out that they were both written by the same author, which is why there's such a strong sense of familiarity. In a nutshell, this book is about two ornithologists who are professors from rival universities competing in a magical bird hunt across England in order to win a giant cash prize and, more importantly, tenure. I gave this book 4 stars. I had a fun time reading this book. I would recommend not taking it too seriously because the plot is very fast and loose, and the romance between the two main characters is pretty instant. That said, the strongest part of the book for me was the humor and undeniable attraction between our two love interests. The story and characters were so silly and ridiculous I couldn't help but laugh aloud while listening to the audiobook of this. Overall, it's a very quick read, and I think it's good if you don't want something with too much investment or thinking required and you just want to go along for the ride. Our next book is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Put simply, if you like a book about a motley crew / found family trying to pull off an impossible heist on top of overthrowing a god ruler, then this book is for you. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was a very solid read. I liked learning about the magic system a lot, and I feel like the action scenes were very dynamic and cool to read about. I also really liked the breadth of different characters that we had. The heist / rebellion itself was also pretty interesting to read because while I was able to predict a few of the twists, there were a few that I also completely did not see coming at all. Without going too much into it, I wasn't expecting there to be a romantic subplot. I didn't necessarily mind it, but it did feel like it could have been a bit stronger because it felt a bit too fast given the circumstances and backgrounds of the two characters. I think both characters involved were performing actions that might have happened later down the line if they had known each other for longer, if that makes sense. But ignoring that fact, I did like the two characters' relationship dynamic. Surprisingly enough, I actually think that the second book will be more interesting than the first book for this series. This series felt like the stock impossible mission against an all-powerful tyrant, and I'm more curious to learn about what it is that the tyrant was so afraid of at the end, the intricacies of the magic system and its offshoots, and how the kingdom will be rebuilt. So in that sense, this book felt like a prelude and that we're just gearing up for something epic to come. Moving on, the next book I have is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and I feel like the title gives away what this book is about. I found it in one of those free public library boxes and remembered learning about Ernest Hemingway in school, so I decided to give it a try. And this book is a 3-star read for me. It was okay. I definitely wouldn't say that it was the most interesting read. I think the writing style wasn't exactly to my taste because it was pretty straightforward and bare bones with the descriptive language and imagery. The upshot, though, is that the prose was clear and easy to understand. The next part is a little bit spoilery, so I would skip ahead to the next book if you don't want to be spoiled, but I really like the messaging of the story, actually, and how the dramatic twist / ironic conclusion to the old man's fishing trip tied into it. To me, this story is about the price of chasing giant victories without thinking about the consequences, or basically when the risk is not worth the reward. And the fact that even though this old man caught a monster of a fish, the victory was pointless in the end because he went too far out to sea and there was no one there to help him or congratulate him. In the end, he struggled so much for this, albeit pretty much unnecessary accomplishment to come back with nothing but a skeleton. The next book is What You're Looking For in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. This book is a short story collection centered around a community library in Japan. In each short story, the protagonist is in some kind of slump, and through one way or another end up at the library where they ask the librarian for some book recommendations. The twist is that on top of giving recommendations for the books that these characters ask for up front, so for example, books on how to start a business or how to play the board game Go, the librarian is somehow able to sense what these characters actually need beyond what they're saying aloud and gives them an additional book recommendation that seems completely out of the blue, but once these characters read the book, they end up having their whole lives turned around. And this book is a 5-star read. This is one of my perennial rereads, and I think in this case it was a long overdue one. This time around, I annotated my hardcover copy of the book that I got last year, which is a testament to how serious I am about this book being a repeat reread offender. I know that this book may not be for everyone, but it is very special to me because of how strongly I resonate with each of the short stories, even if they're all at different life stages compared to me. I find that the epiphanies made by the characters and perspective shifts they experience help me to ground myself whenever I feel lost or resentful. This book reminds me to be grateful for what I have and to do my best with what I have. The characters have also inspired me to be the best version of myself that I can and to have a positive outlook. It's definitely good to reread this book in short bursts though, because there's a lot of repetition when it comes to some of the plot details, which I would bear in mind. The next book I have to talk about is another perennial reread. It is How to Win Friends and Family. It is How to Win Friends and Influence Family. It is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. For this book's summary, it's literally in the title. This is a classic in human relations and was recommended to me by my dad a while back before I was going to start my first job ever. And it actually helped me a lot when working in customer service. The concepts are actually really simple and seem like common sense, but they're really easy to forget in the heat of the moment. The main point is that there's no magic bullet to get people to like or listen to what you have to say, but this book gives you some tips and common pitfalls to avoid. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but this book was a 5-star read for me. Similar to what you are looking for is in the library, I find it really useful to come back to this book from time to time to refresh and recenter myself on the concepts discussed. In particular, I've been struggling with the sensation that I'm regressing in my social skills and social awareness because I'm putting too much pressure on myself to manage other people's emotions. This book reminds me that the greatest joy in talking to other people is actually learning from them, and in order to do that, you need to be genuinely interested in other people, and you also need to not talk so much, but listen. This next book I'm pretty excited to talk about. I feel like it's like a sleeper favorite book. I wasn't expecting it to leave such a big impact on me, and that is Kokun, The Girl from the West by Nahoko Uehashi. This book is an ecological fantasy that takes place in this one empire whose rise to dominance over the surrounding kingdoms is because of this specific grain of rice called ohale that they alone hold the key to cultivating. Ohale is extremely prolific and resistant to almost all infestations, and as a result, it becomes the primary food staple and the literal foundation of the empire's power. Now, while the introduction of ohale seems like a blessing, it's also a curse. Ohale can't be grown with other plants or food sources, and any soil that has had ohale grown in it can't grow anywhere else unless you change out the soil entirely. Furthermore, ohale can only be harvested, not grown. If you try replanting the ohale you harvest, the rice that grows is poisonous. And in order to grow more ohale, you need to have seeds given to you from the government. So in effect, while ohale allows villages to feed their people, it also enslaves them to the empire. And this book explores what happens when an infestation starts decimating ohale crop yields, bringing about potential famine and also threatening the empire's base of power as people desperately search for alternative ways of cultivating ohale without the empire's restrictions, and also to prevent starvation. Now, this book was a 5-star read. Admittedly, I was first drawn to this book because of its beautiful cover, But then I took a quick skim of the blurb and was hooked by the concept of a reincarnated goddess who can read scent voices. To preface, this story doesn't have a lot of action. It was a lot more political than I thought. This book is very plot and world-centered rather than character-centered. So that reincarnated goddess who can read scent voices, she's not actually the main focus of this book. She's just a character that's there. We don't spend a lot of time on character development or forming a connection to any of them. They mostly just come as they are. I really like this book a lot because it reminded me of Dune. Both series center around this one precious resource that provides amazing benefits to mankind while also subjugating them. I found this concept so interesting and heartbreaking at the same time, and I liked reading about how this battle for resources influences the plans of different factions, and how those plans influence other factions' plans, and so on. As of now, there's no English translation for the second book available, but I'm so desperately curious to see where the story goes because we left off on a really big cliffhanger. For the next book that I have to talk about, I have 2 words: magic, bureaucracy. This book is set in a Singapore where, in addition to regular humans, there are supernatural beings that exist among the population. Our main character, Ben, is an employee for a government department responsible for working with supernatural beings and addressing their concerns so that they can function as quote-unquote normal members of society as best as they can. One day, Ben discovers that an entire neighborhood has been sinking in and out of reality, and that the severity and breadth of these occurrences is only getting worse and may take the rest of the city down with it. To quote the blurb, Ben may not have the budget or the bandwidth, but he has the best, if highly irregular and supernaturally inclined, team to help him. I gave this book 4 stars. I think you will really like this book if you are an office worker. There were a lot of wry comments targeted towards company life that I found pretty hilarious as someone who works in corporate. Something else I adored about this book is the fact that there were so many vocabulary words that were new to me. As a native English speaker, it's very rare for me to come across words that I don't know the meaning of in the books I read these days, and I miss that feeling of learning new vocabulary. I ended up making about 20 flashcards of new words from this book alone. As for the story itself, my favorite part was learning about Ben's supernatural powers and getting to know the different characters. The plot itself wasn't the most novel, but I don't think that was a bad thing at all. The real strength of this book for me was seeing how Ben's relationship with the other characters evolved as he learned to rely on others instead of taking everything on to himself. Getting to books that I read more recently, we have Gemina by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the second book in the Illuminae files. This book takes place on a space station, and we have 2 main protagonists. Hannah, who is the space station commander's daughter, and then Nick, a member of a notorious crime family that has a branch operating out of the space station, and he's also Hannah's drug dealer. Fun times commence when the space station gets invaded by an intergalactic megacorporation. There is an outbreak of alien predators, and a malfunction with the wormhole that the station is built upon threatens to rip apart the universe. And Hannah and Nick find themselves having to work together to fix all of this. This book is a 5-star read for me, and this is also a reread. I really like this series because they are told in an epistolary format, which means that the story is told through a bunch of letters, correspondences, and other forms of media from in-world, which is really cool. I also really like the audiobook version in particular because it's performed by a full cast and has sound effects, so it's really easy to be immersed in the story. I do think that the story structure between the books in this series gets a little repetitive because the main characters of each book are couples. That's just something to know before going in. I will say that of the 3 books, Gemina is my favorite because the banter is really funny between the characters, and Nick and Hannah have pretty interesting backstories / qualifications. The second to last book that I have to talk about is Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. This book is written as a screenplay or script for a TV show called Black and White, except we're following an extra, generic Asian man. Throughout the screenplay, we explore themes of race, immigration, and assimilation, especially from the perspective of Asian Americans. This book was a 5-star read. Right off the bat, I liked how the book was written like a screenplay instead of in a traditional novel format. It was pretty trippy, and I liked how the author really committed to the bit. The commentary was very sharp and witty, and it also cut a bit deep. I was impressed at how nuanced the author's discussion of Asian identity within America was. It's really easy to just make wisecracks about how we get stereotyped by ignorant or flat-out racist people, but the author went beyond that to provide historical context and also point out that some of these stereotypes are self-perpetuated, while also not diminishing the struggle between assimilation and creating/preserving our own identity. Now we have the last book, or latest book that I've read, which is The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sunyi Dean. I feel like it's a bit tricky to explain what this book is about without spoiling parts of it, but I'll do my best. So when the story begins, we are following a woman named Mercy Chan living in Kowloon, which is the ghost-infested slums of Hong Kong. Mercy is a mysterious character because she washed up on the shores of Hong Kong 33 years ago with no memories, in the middle of World War II when the Japanese were occupying Hong Kong. Alone and memoryless, she managed to find a way to survive and has since been working as a ghost talker to assuage angry and bitter spirits haunting Kowloon. Things start getting interesting though when an especially powerful spirit who seems to somehow be tied to Mercy's hidden past begins killing locals and might be working up to a bigger plan to destroy the entire district of Kowloon, maybe more. This book was a 4-star read for me. Overall, I thought this was a solid read. The author did a really good job of creating a creepy, unsettling atmosphere throughout the book, and it was really easy to be enveloped in the world that she was painting with her words. For example, I remember feeling the stickiness and grime on my own skin as she described the humid Hong Kong weather and dirty Kowloon slums. As a whole, I really liked the plot as well and getting to learn more about Mercy's past. However, I felt like the story structure was a little bit strange. We had a lot of action at the beginning and end of the book, but in the middle we switched perspectives and slowed down the pacing a lot. It was very interesting because we were getting more and more details behind Mercy's past and how it connects to this evil spirit, but it also felt like the execution was a bit clumsy, if you know what I mean. I'm thinking that it might have been better if the story was organized so that we started the perspective changes a bit earlier in the book and we just alternate instead of having it go Mercy for the first 20% of the book, and then the next 50% of the book is the other character, and then the remaining 10%, trying to do math in my head, was Mercy again. And that didn't bother me too much because I was really invested in the story and figure out Mercy's backstory, but that was just something that I wanted to note. And there we go. Those were the 16 books in chronological order that I've read in the first 6 months of 2026. I think overall I've actually been having a pretty good reading year, all things considered. Had a lot of 4-star and 5-star reads, and I'm looking forward to what other books that I'll be reading in the later half of this year. I hope that some of the books that I talked about today caught some of your guys' interest and that you guys give it a chance. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap things up here, and I'll see you guys in my next episode. Bye bye! Okay, hello. It's time for the bonus section of today's podcast episode. For context, I'm someone who isn't really into spirituality, so I decided that it'd be fun today to do a tarot card reading session where basically I just looked up a free tarot card reading website, picked 6 cards, and now I'm just going to go through the results. I'll leave a link to the website that I used in the description if you're interested. The first card I have is how you feel about yourself, and I pulled the Temperance card. The description is that you feel a need for harmony and balance in your life, and indeed are starting to feel that some peace has already been restored. If you have been through some tough times, such as a breakup of a relationship or financial problems, peace will be restored. However, if you are still experiencing problems, this is a time for calm, careful star. The star suggests that what you want most at this time is some good fortune, a bright and happy future. If you have been ill, suffered bereavement, or disappointed in love, your luck is about to change. This is your wish card. It will bring happiness, fulfillment, and good health. You also may receive a gift or gifts. Wow, that's so exciting. Oh my gosh. To be fair, my birthday is also soon, so I'm sure I will be receiving gifts, or at least gifting myself something. You know, now that I'm scrolling through this website, I will say that the tarot card designs are a bit strange, so be warned. The next card is your fears, and I pulled the devil. You are afraid that it's out of control. You simply cannot resist this passionate attraction. I'm sorry, what? This is very intense. Despite the fact that it's addictive and unlikely to be right, you just can't stop yourself. Whatever it is, a passion for someone who's not good for you. Money deals that are too good to be true, or any other kind of temptation. Try to resist as it is unlikely to have a positive outcome. If you're feeling low in self-belief and self-worth and doubt your abilities, don't. Have confidence in yourself. It's not too late to change direction. Okay, I'll be careful. The next card is card 4. What is going for you? I pulled the Lovers, and the description is that new love and commitment will enter your life even if there's no one on the horizon. Be prepared for a surprise. Throw caution to the wind and expect joyous and happy times ahead. That's good news. My parents will be very happy to know this, as I am single right now. Alright, card 5, we have what is going against you. I pulled the Fool. Beware of impetuous and impulsive decisions. They could cost you dearly. Draw on your knowledge and experience. Perhaps there are naive and immature beliefs behind your current desires. Are you looking to move onwards and upwards or run away? Look before you leap. You don't want to appear the fool, do you? Okay, this one is interesting. I feel like the thing with tarot cards is that you often, I think they're kind of generic enough that it's easy for you to find ways for it to be applicable to your, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing because it's making me reflect. The last card is the likely outcome, and I pulled the Chariot. The description is conflict ends in victory. Keep charging ahead. This is a time of change, travel, and success if you stay committed to achieving your goals. A journey relating to work is imminent, and if you've had your eye on that new car, it will soon be yours. I'm not looking to buy a new car anytime soon. I'm not a car person, but I am excited for this time of change, travel, and success if I stay committed to achieving my goals. I feel like one goal that I have in particular is to prioritize learning and working on my personal projects outside of work that I'm really excited about. So for example, I've been really wanting to start creating my own personal website. I've also been putting more work into creating content for my YouTube channel, not because I'm looking to become an influencer or anything, but just because I've been feeling it's something that I genuinely enjoy doing. So I've been trying to focus on making videos that make me happy and inspire me. But that's enough of this for now. This was very interesting. It looks like I've got some good fortune coming my way, which is pretty exciting. We'll see how accurate this tarot reading is, but I feel like this was definitely really fun to do. Maybe I'll do this for the next podcast episode I